Hello, my name is Eric, and this is Daily Drivers, where we investigate whether or not various operating systems are seriously usable on a day-to-day basis. I just want to take a minute to talk about software piracy. When I first entered the scene back in the 90s, we called it warez, although some people thought it was pronounced like the Hispanic name warez. Sounds to me like something a Mario adversary would use. There was, and probably still is, a huge wares scene where almost any software one might desire could be found for free. Software piracy has existed as long as commercial software has existed. There is a famous open letter Bill Gates wrote, published way back in 1976, called An Open Letter to Hobbyists, where he discussed some potential ramifications of piracy, notably,
most directly, the thing you do is theft.
Yeah, that was published a couple weeks before I was born. So let me reiterate what Bill said. Software piracy is theft. Commercial software costs money to make, which is expected to be recouped from the sales of the software. Those costs include things like the salaries of the developers, maybe computers if they have to buy new ones, electricity to run those computers, maybe there's licensing fees, advertising, and also there's things less directly related like office rent, non-developer salaries, things like that. None of these things are free, and I'd hate to be the one to drop $1,000,000 on a project only to have it wildly stolen. So real quick, let's discuss how the wares scene worked when I was active in it, and probably still works today. Wares dudes, as they were sometimes referred to, were typically organized into groups with leet names like, well, these. Yes, that's almost 100 of them. No, that's not nearly all of them. Nowhere near, not even a majority. That's just what I could find in a short time looking. Some groups focused on specific tasks, most notably cracking and couriers, while others wore multiple hats. Someone, somewhere, called the supplier, would get a copy of some piece of software, and there are various ways to do so. Some worked at computer shops where they'd get a copy from work, sometimes before the official release. Some just bought a copy normally off the shelf. There was occasional leak from a developer, things like that. Crackers would then defeat whatever security measures were in place so that the software could be used without limit, and couriers were the official release sites for the cracking groups. The entire purpose of wares groups was to simply provide non-free software for free. Some groups tried justifying their actions by claiming that, for example, they provided trial software for longer than the trial period allowed, in case one needed longer than that evaluation period to decide if the software would work for them. But most groups made no excuses and just posted their wares. Wares groups were generally after what amounts to bragging rights within the scene. They might focus on zero-day releases, meaning they released their wares the same day as the official release, or maybe they focused on the sheer number of releases they did, or something else perhaps. For example, one group's motto was, "Where others patch, we keygen," meaning that instead of changing some part of the program to avoid anti-piracy measures, they would determine the algorithm a given program used to create its serial numbers or product keys or whatever the program called them, and then they would write a program to generate new serials. So as I said, some groups claimed they were providing software to go beyond the limits of the shareware versions, whether those limits were time, functionality, or something else. For apps that didn't have a shareware or trial version, the software was provided in a manner consistent with shareware, meaning you could evaluate it without paying full price for it, but if you kept using it past a reasonable trial period, you were expected to pay for it. I rather doubt anyone ever did, but that was the theory they operated under. Now, there's a subset of wares called abandonware. Abandonware is software that is no longer available for purchase and or is no longer supported by the original developers. In other words, abandonware no longer earns money for the developers, so the concern of the developers not making money from sales of the software is moot. This doesn't mean that you can pirate an older version of something like Photoshop, because the developers, in this case Adobe, is still selling the current version of the software. Windows is a special case. The abandonware scene generally considers older versions of Windows, certainly up to Windows XP and probably Vista as well, maybe even 7, to be abandoned. However, Microsoft is, of course, still around, and they actively assert their copyright on all versions of Windows. Notably, one of the most popular abandonware sites on the web carries nothing newer than pre-release versions of XP because they don't want MS to stomp them flat. They also have betas of Vista under its codename Longhorn, but that's a different story. Now, let's get to why I'm covering all of this. Where's his theft? I said it already. There's no doubt of that. It's not in question. If nothing else, remember that programs are covered by copyright and often trademarks as well. However, my feelings about abandonware are a bit different. As I pointed out, abandonware is software that no longer makes the developers any money or is generally unsupported by the developers, so I have no problem with that. The biggest abandonware group I was a part of had a hard and fast rule: nothing newer than 10 years old. For the most part, developers make their money in the first few months, especially if it's a game. So by the time a full decade has passed, the odds of the developers making any money from a particular app is effectively zero, ignoring things like MMOs. So why am I discussing all of this? Because I believe that using or sharing abandonware is acceptable. I see no problem with using software that has no hope of making the developer money, especially for those applications where the developer doesn't even exist anymore. Remember Borland? How about Connectix? This will be very relevant to this series. Some of the items that we'll be covering are only available for purchase, not for free, but some can be considered abandonware. Well, that's all for now. If I haven't scared you off or bored you to death, go ahead and start the series with the episode titled Emulation. Warez,